audio, my dude.
In 2 different states, 2 men stand accused of intentional murder. One targeted a healthcare CEO in Manhattan, the other a conservative activist in Utah. But these cases aren't just about who pulled the trigger. They're about how far prosecutors can push the line on terrorism and capital punishment laws to achieve a death sentence. Both defendants could face the death penalty, but the paths that the prosecutors must take to reach that sentence involve different twists and turns. In New York, a state judge recently dismissed the terrorism counts against Luigi Mangione because the act wasn't broad enough to count as terrorism under state law. But in Mangione's federal case, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty because the DOJ framed his acts as terroristic in the broad sense that encompasses stalking. In Utah, prosecutors are alleging that when Tyler Robinson fired a single shot in a public setting, it created such a serious risk of harm to other people that it justifies an aggravated murder charge. The state's ability to meet the great risk threshold of aggravated murder could mean the difference between life in prison and the death penalty for Robinson. So let's break down the charges in both cases, examine the legal theories prosecutors must prove to get a death penalty sentence, and see if we can determine the most likely outcomes. On December 4, 2024, the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was assassinated outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel while attending an investor conference. His alleged killer, Luigi Mangione. The evidence seems...
Before we get into this, I already talked a little bit about Luigi. Though I'm not a fan of his, I am staunchly against the death penalty in general. So, yeah, for like, even assassins, I would say that's not okay. Same thing for the Charlie shooter. I don't know his name. I know he just said it. I already forgot it again. I'm so bad at remembering these guys' names. Which one is
prosecutors must take to reach that sentence in Luigi Mangione because it created such a serious... Prosecutors are alleging that when as terroristic in the broad sense because the act wasn't broad enough to count as terrorism under state law. But in Mangione's federal case, prosecutors are stalking. In Utah, prosecutors are alleging that when Tyler Robinson fired a single shot...
Tyler Robinson, that's his name. Sorry. Tyler.
2024, the CEO of United Healthcare, Brian Thompson, was assassinated outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel while attending an investor conference. His alleged killer, Luigi Mangione. The evidence seems conclusive. Surveillance video, DNA, physical evidence, and Mangione's own writings tie him to the crime. He is now facing 2 separate prosecutions. The state charged him with first-degree murder in furtherance of terrorism, second-degree murder as a crime of terrorism, simple second-degree murder, and additional counts of criminal possession of a weapon and possession of a forged instrument. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Mangione for the federal crimes of murder through use of a firearm, stalking, and a firearms offense. The feds have jurisdiction because Mangione allegedly traveled over state lines using an interstate bus line, stayed at a hostel that serves interstate customers, and used interstate electronic communications and the internet when he planned his attack and took a bus from Atlanta to New York City to carry it out. Now, if you think this sounds like double jeopardy, that is, he can't be prosecuted for the same crime twice, you'd be mostly incorrect. The state of New York and the federal government can both prosecute Mangione in separate cases for reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. But in a major development, on September 16, 2025, Justice Gregory Caro of the New York Supreme Court ruled that the terrorism charges against Mangione must be dismissed. New York's terrorism statute, found in Penal Law Article 490, defines an act of terrorism as the underlying crime committed with the additional intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence government policy through intimidation or coercion, or affect government conduct through murder, assassination, or kidnapping. Passed after the 9/11 attacks, this law allows prosecutors to add terrorism charges to existing offenses, increasing the penalty. The terrorism counts against Mangione were controversial, and now the judge has thrown them out. Well, why? Because New York's terrorism statute requires proof that a defendant acted with the intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or influence government policy. This is a very high bar, and for good reason. The law is a response to what we think of as traditional terrorist attacks, things like 9/11, overseas embassy bombings, and the Oklahoma City attack. As a New York Court of Appeals warned in People v. Morales, if you apply the terrorism label too loosely, you risk trivializing it. Here, prosecutors pointed to Mangione's ideological writings as proof that he was trying to terrorize United Healthcare employees and the public. Mangione's writings include references to revolutionary anarchism and his fury at the health insurance industry. But the court wasn't buying it. Judge Caro said that a company's workforce is not a civilian population in the sense the statute contemplates. The legislative examples that prompted them to pass the law are indiscriminate acts that paralyze whole communities with fear, like bombings, mass shootings, and hijackings. Mangione's crime, however premeditated and grotesque, was the targeted killing of a single executive. Even his own notebooks stress spreading a message and winning public support, not threatening civilians into submission. The judge drew a sharp line between ideology and terroristic intent. Quote, "While there is no doubt that the crime at issue here is not ordinary street crime, it does not follow that all non-street crimes were meant to be included within the reach of the terrorism statute. While the people place great emphasis on defendant's ideological motive, there is no indication in the statute that a murder committed for ideological reasons, in this case the defendant's apparent desire to draw attention to what he perceived as inequities or greed within the American healthcare system, fits within the definition of terrorism without establishing the necessary element of an intent to intimidate or coerce. The court agrees with the defendant that the people appear to conflate an ideological belief with the intent to intimidate or coerce the civilian population. While the civilian was clearly expressing an animus towards UHC and the healthcare industry generally, it does not follow that his goal was to intimidate and coerce a civilian population, and indeed, there was no evidence presented of such a goal. Plenty of crimes are driven by ideology, but the terrorism statute requires a conscious objective to intimidate a broad civilian population or change government policy through violence. That element was missing here. Judge Caro said, quote, "The people suggest that the element of intimidation and coercion can be met because some UHC employees felt fearful after the murder and some UHC employees received threats. But putting aside that some employees received threats even before the murder, one so serious that investigators traveled to another state to investigate, and every murder has the potential to induce some degree of fear. For example, a random murder in the subway will cause riders to feel fearful about riding the subway. That fails to establish that this was the defendant's intent, or that the conduct fits within the statutory definition of terrorism." For comparison, the ruling points to the People v. Morales case, where gang gunfire killed a 10-year-old at a Bronx christening. The prosecution said that it was terrorism because it scared rival gangs. The New York Court of Appeals rejected that comparison, holding that the phrase civilian population means something broader. It includes neighborhoods, cities, and nations rather than small subsets of people like gang members or, in this case, insurance employees. By that same reasoning, Mangione's actions, though horrific, fell outside the terrorism statute. The judge dismissed the terrorism counts as legally insufficient, leaving intact the intentional murder and weapons charges. Now, to be clear, Judge Caro's ruling does not suddenly take the death penalty off the table. New York State hasn't had the death penalty since 2004. Conviction for a terrorism charge could have resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Now Mangione's most serious possible sentence, for murder in the second degree, is life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Meanwhile, in the federal case, prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. Mangione was indicted for murder through use of a firearm, which can carry the death penalty. Attorney General Pam Bondi contends that the killing was carefully planned and that it was executed in a public place, which raised the risk of harm to bystanders. These are all aggravating factors that weigh in favor of capital punishment. Bondi frames the killing as not just a homicide, but as political violence motivated by Mangione's alleged ideological opposition to the health insurance industry. Mangione's defense attorneys filed several motions asking the federal judge to preclude the government from seeking the death penalty in the federal case, arguing that Bondi's public directive was, quote, political, arbitrary, and capricious, and that it violated DOJ procedure. The defense argues that Bondi made her public announcement about the death penalty even before Mangione was formally indicted. They say these comments may have improperly influenced public perception, making it hard for him to get a fair trial. And this highlights the double jeopardy issue. Many people have asked why Mangione is facing murder charges in both state and federal court. Isn't that what double jeopardy prevents? Well, not exactly. The idea behind double jeopardy is to protect individuals from being retried for the same offense after they've already been acquitted or convicted. It also prevents the government from using its vast resources to repeatedly prosecute someone in the hopes of getting a different result. So double jeopardy generally prevents retrial even if new evidence emerges after a trial that suggests a person should have been convicted. However, there are exceptions to the double jeopardy rule. The one that applies here is known as dual sovereignty. And it means that if someone commits a crime that violates both state law and federal law, they can face prosecution under each system without violating the double jeopardy clause. On its face, it may seem unfair that a person could be acquitted of murder in one court but convicted by another. But the concept of dual sovereignty, the ability for the federal government to prosecute regardless of what happens.
That's our justice system for you. I can't sue him in one state, I'll sue him in every other state. Fuck it. Just look at Trump for like a prime example of somebody abusing the justice system. Hardcore. Especially in the courts.
In state court became hugely important during the civil rights movement. In the Jim Crow South, prosecutors commonly refused to charge, and all-white juries commonly refused to convict defendants who murdered or brutalized black citizens and civil rights workers. The infamous 1955 acquittal of Emmett Till's killers is one example. The state trial was a sham, but without a federal hate crime statute or any other kind of jurisdictional hook, the DOJ was powerless. But there were some cases starting in the 1960s where the Department of Justice had the will and the way.
That's
the most
big part of the reason why we even have that now. is because of like the Emmett Till case and how they got acquitted. Absolutely fucking fucked. It's good things have gotten better. Just sucks they're not perfect. You know?
Famous example is the Mississippi burning case of 1964. After 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, were murdered by the Klan, Mississippi refused to prosecute. The DOJ brought charges under federal civil rights laws, and after intervention by the U.S. Supreme Court, the federal government ultimately obtained convictions on 8 of the 18 defendants. So while dual sovereignty might sound like a loophole for prosecutors to get a second shot at conviction, historically it has been a lifeline in certain cases. There's another reason for both state and federal charges: to secure the death penalty. This famously happened with Terry Nichols, Timothy McVeigh's co-conspirator in the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Nichols was first prosecuted by the feds and convicted of a capital crime, but the jury deadlocked on whether to give the death penalty, ultimately resulting in a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. The state of Oklahoma then charged Nichols with capital murder in order to secure a death sentence. But after finding Nichols guilty of 161 murder counts, that jury also deadlocked on the death penalty.
Jesus.
But some critics argue that the dual sovereignty doctrine waters down the double jeopardy protections. New York State is one of the only states that has its own unique law addressing this. Under CPL Section 4020, if you've already been prosecuted in another jurisdiction for the same act or criminal transaction, New York State generally cannot prosecute you again. That means if you're tried federally or even in another state, New York usually bars its prosecutors from taking a second swing. New York gives criminal defendants more protection than the baseline. But the New York statute only kicks in once jeopardy has attached, and that means a conviction, acquittal, or the jury has been sworn in another jurisdiction. At the moment, Mangione hasn't been tried federally. The DOJ's case may take years to get to trial. That means New York's case isn't barred yet. Because the federal trial hasn't begun, the defense's double jeopardy motion is premature. So what does this mean for Mangione? In practice, he'll face trial in state court first for intentional murder and weapons charges now that the terrorism counts are gone. Even if he's convicted in New York, the federal case can still go forward because federal prosecutors are not bound by the New York rule. Is Mangione going to get the death penalty in federal court? I mean, no one can predict the future. But I think federal prosecutors face an uphill battle. There's very little about this case that differentiates it from any other premeditated murder. And Mangione otherwise apparently has a clean criminal history. Pam Bondi's characterization of it as political violence may be factually true to some extent, but I wouldn't expect that characterization to have much impact on a jury pulled from the Southern District of New York. 2 Oklahoma juries deadlocked on the death penalty for Terry Nichols after the horrendous Oklahoma City bombing. Is a jury from the Southern District of New York really going to give the death penalty for the murder of a single man? Mangione's case shows what can happen when prosecutors push the boundaries of a state terrorism law beyond what it was meant to cover. Meanwhile, over in Utah, Robinson's case tests the statutory definition of aggravated murder.
Now, you just saw how labels like terrorism change everything.
They're so mad about the Wookiee side of things that they just really want to throw the book at any of them that they label as like left, right, or left leaning, I guess you could say. And it's just, it's fucking actually sad. It's just that they have to go that far. I mean, they're obviously taking advantage of the guys being in that position and, you know, being stupid enough to take a life. Now they can throw the book at somebody who they can label as like a radical leftist. They want socialism. They want to kill everybody in capitalism, burn it all down. And that's just all of what the left is. And that's just not the case at all. Like, there's a lot of people on the left who are still a bit pro-capitalist, not socialist. But if you were to listen to, like, a MAGA supporter try to, like, explain anything left of MAGA is, like, communism, apparently. Even liberals are communists in their own ways.
In court, but the same thing.
We can't really give them that much credit because the far left, the very minority of it, will do the same as well because they've just decided to become the demons that haunt them, I guess. For some reason. They just have a lot of influence online. And that kind of just sucks massively for anybody center of that, you know, or a bit to the right of it, I guess you could say. That isn't like a far left, you know, tanky, whatever bullshit they want. Just ultimately it just comes down to the fucking left versus right again. And I'm really curious how they're gonna play Tyler though. I guess they could, because he opened up fire on a crowd that's obviously reckless endangerment. Like, you could easily hit a lot of people, especially if you fired more than one bullet. That might be how they do it. That, or Trump will just sign an executive order, like you did, after this video was posted. From what I saw on the news, you know, a day or two ago, that happened. This video is 4 days old, so yeah.
Happens in the news. Stories use the same facts, but put them in different frames. But it's particularly interesting to see how the media is covering the Mangione case. Over 450 sources covered it, with 28% of the reporting coming from the left, 25% coming from the right, and 47% from the center. And when you examine the headlines, you see some very different frames emerge. Left-leaning sources focus on the judge finding insufficient evidence of terrorism, but headlines on the right interpret the judge's ruling as endorsing political violence and letting a cold-blooded killer skate. Meanwhile, in the center, sources focused on what charges remain, noting that Mangione still faces second-degree murder charges in New York. Now, the headlines that you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news, and that's why we like to see the news from as many angles as we can with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now, they're offering LegalEaglets 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. Because Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And one of my favorite parts is their bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources you've never heard of, where there's no telling who owns it or what agenda they might have. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. Like the recent story about Tucker Carlson's eulogy for Charlie Kirk. During a memorial service for Kirk, Carlson said back in the day Jesus was murdered by, quote, a bunch of guys sitting around eating hummus. And Carlson's comments were criticized by Trump's first ambassador to Israel, who said, quote, anti-Semitic innuendo and cackling like a chicken are never appropriate. Now, that story is being heavily covered by right-leaning sources who accuse Carlson of using anti-Semitic dog whistles, with 61% of the sources leaning right, while only 22% of the sources are on the left. So if you only get your news from one side, you might have missed that backlash. But by showing you what's covered and what's not, Ground News makes it easier to find common ground with people who don't share your politics. But all this is why Ground News is my favorite way to get the news. And as a LegalEagle, you can save 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code on screen or clicking on the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and Blind Spot feed. By subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. So click on the link below or scan the code today, or I'll see you in court.
On September 10th, 2025, at approximately 12:23 p.m., Charlie Kirk was shot and killed while speaking at an outdoor event at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. After the shooting, law enforcement located a bolt-action .30-06 rifle near the campus. Surveillance footage showed a person dressed in dark clothing climbing onto a roof near the event plaza, dropping onto a rooftop, assuming a prone position, and then moving towards the shooting location. That subject later fled the roof carrying what appeared to be a rifle. Investigators recovered the rifle wrapped in a towel in a wooded area off campus. Forensic analysis revealed DNA consistent with Robinson on the rifle trigger, 1 fired casing, 2 of the unfired casings, and the towel. Robinson apparently confessed to his family and surrendered to law enforcement on the evening of September 11, 2025. According to investigators, text messages and a handwritten note were recovered. The note, found by Robinson's roommate under a keyboard, stated, "I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it." Subsequent text exchanges between Robinson and his roommate included admissions that Robinson was responsible for the shooting and referenced his plans involving the rifle, his belief that he had planned to keep it secret, and instructions to the roommate to delete messages and avoid speaking with police. Children under the age of 14 were present at the event and could have seen or heard the shooting. And keep this in mind because it's an essential fact to the prosecution's legal theory. Robinson is charged with 7 counts, most significantly with aggravated murder in violation of Utah Code Section 76-5202. The state alleges that Robinson intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Charlie Kirk, and that in doing so, he, quote, knowingly created a great risk of death to another individual other than Charlie Kirk and the defendant. Aggravated murder is...
And it was a bunch of kids, too. Yeah. Yeah. That's basically a school shooting at that point. Even if no kid got shot, like, you're risking it for the biscuit, my dude. Like, ungodly so. And it's not a good idea. Fucking just don't do that shit. Like, what the fuck? Especially with the fucking kids and shit. Like, why? Why? Why would you do that? Like, you couldn't have waited till he was out in the fucking parking lot? Like, loading up his van, nobody around, fucking clear shot? No. You had to do it when he was surrounded by a bunch of kids. Now they're gonna give you the death penalty. Not that I was trying to give somebody an idea or anything like that. Don't do that shit at all. You shouldn't be killing anybody. But, like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, I guess he doesn't go anywhere else. Like, going to the college campus would have been the only opportunity to do that. Because he doesn't do anything other than, like they said earlier, debate a bunch of college students. So, would have just been better not to do it, but, you know. In retrospect, you know. It is what it is.
Is a capital crime, meaning the death penalty is a possible punishment. The murder charge includes a victim targeting enhancement that Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because of Robinson's belief or perception regarding Kirk's political expression. It's also alleged that, as to count 1, the shooting allegedly occurred in the presence of a child under 14 who saw or heard the homicide. This is also an aggravating factor. Robinson was also charged with felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury with the same enhancements. Finally, he was charged with tampering with a witness for telling his roommate to delete incriminating text messages and not to talk to police, and for several counts of obstruction of justice for hiding the weapon and destroying his clothing. The most serious charge is aggravated murder, and it's the only capital crime in the state of Utah, meaning it's punishable by the death penalty. Under Utah law, aggravated murder is a form of criminal homicide defined in Utah Code Section 76-5202. To convict under that statute, the state must first prove that the defendant intentionally or knowingly caused the death of another person. But premeditation or lying in wait isn't sufficient to turn murder into aggravated murder. Prosecutors must also prove one or more aggravating circumstances described in Section 76-5202 sub 2. Utah statute identifies multiple alternative aggravating circumstances. Robinson is charged with just one, quote, knowingly created a great risk of death to another individual other than the deceased individual and the actor. Even a single homicide can qualify as aggravated murder and thus eligible for the death penalty if the killing puts another person at significant risk of death, not just the intended victim. He shot at Kirk from 160 yards away while Kirk was in a huge crowd. That puts other people at risk of death, right? I mean, it seems fairly obvious. But when you dig a little deeper, it's more complicated. Robinson's defense attorneys are probably going to argue that Robinson took a single, well-aimed shot that hit his intended target. And while there may be some...
I mean, that is true. He didn't just open fire in a crowd. He obviously had some kind of level of training. But even with that, dude, like, there could have been people standing behind the tent that he couldn't see. And that's, like, a risk you had to take. And, like, that's gonna be one hell of a defense if you pull that off. It's just... there's so many different little things that they're gonna fucking nitpick about it in court that just we have to wait to see what exactly they're gonna try to get him on, because there's too many factors. Like, there's only like 2 videos of it right now, but I guarantee you there's probably like a few more at least that we'll find and like see eventually in the court case. So, you know, hopefully we'll get more to it all instead of just, you know, 1 or 2 angles. Still don't agree with the death penalty, however, though. Still not really for it. I mean, I don't know. Should he get life? I mean, how old is this guy? I think he said he was like mid-20s, early 20s. I don't know if I'd give him life. Maybe 50 to life? I don't know. It would heavily depend on the circumstances.
Some possible or hypothetical risk to people around Kirk, it was not a great risk as that term is legally defined. To prove a great risk, the prosecutors must show 4 factors. First, knowledge. That Robinson was aware, or should have been aware, of the risk his conduct would create. Second, that his act created a great risk of death, meaning that the risk is significant, not merely speculative. Third, that the risk must have been posed to a person other than the homicide victim or the defendant themselves. And fourth, there has to be a sufficient nexus between the defendant's conduct and the risk. To judge whether Robinson has a defense, we have to look at the Utah Supreme Court's 2019 decision interpreting the statute. In State v. Sosa Hurtado, the court affirmed the aggravated murder conviction of Yelfris Sosa Hurtado for killing Steven Chavez at a single-room smoke shop in Salt Lake City. Steven was standing behind one counter and his father, Isabel, was standing behind another. Sosa Hurtado shot at Isabel, but missed, shattering a glass case that hurled glass and wood into Isabel's leg. Sosa Hurtado turned and, with his back to Isabel, shot and killed Steven. The court clarified that a third party does not have to literally be in the path of the deadly act. Utah recognizes that the risk can be somewhat indirect, as long as risk was foreseeable and proximate in time and space. The court said, quote, "The knowing risk was created most obviously when Sosa Hurtado fired his assault rifle directly at Isabel, and that the jury could have reasonably concluded that such a shot was an element of the circumstances of the murder of Steven." The court pointed out that there was temporal and spatial proximity and an actual threat against Isabel, as Sosa Hurtado fired at Isabel seconds before he shot at Steven, he shot at Steven when Isabel was close by, and there was both an intent to harm or kill Isabel and an act specifically directed at Isabel. Ultimately, the court concluded that Isabel was in the zone of danger when Sosa Hurtado killed Steven, and thus his actions constituted aggravated murder. The facts of Sosa Hurtado are instructive, and they're quite a bit different than what we have in the murder of Charlie Kirk, where a person fired a single shot in a public area where thousands of people were gathered to hear Kirk speak. The first question that we have to ask is, what about the gun? Obviously, Robinson took a gun and fired it into a crowded public area. Well, Robinson can argue that the mere use of a firearm in a public setting cannot satisfy the great risk requirement. Firearms are inherently dangerous, but if every gun homicide automatically created a great risk of death to others, then virtually every intentional shooting would qualify as aggravated murder. That interpretation arguably collapses the statutory distinction between ordinary murder and aggravated murder. Utah courts avoid such overbreadth by requiring more than the mere possibility of risk. Sosa Hurtado said that the risk must be more than just speculative. Here, the state has not alleged that bystanders were literally in the line of fire, that stray bullets struck near others, or that Robinson fired indiscriminately into a crowd. He wasn't a spree killer. He had his sights set on one man. A shooter like Sosa Hurtado, who fires into a room with multiple people, knows or should know that others might get hit. But courts will look closely at whether there was a likelihood or high probability of great risk of death, not just its possibility. There is a legitimate risk that someone other than Kirk could have been killed, but the defense and prosecution will have vastly different ideas about whether the risk was remote or real. Spatial and temporal proximity to bystanders matter. If the bystanders were too far away, or there was no realistic risk that the shot would affect them, that weakens the case for great risk. Sosa Hurtado underscores that proximity in space and time can affect whether the risk was sufficiently grave and foreseeable. Robinson was allegedly on the roof with a scoped rifle. He's going to argue that no bystanders were in the direct line of fire, and he took a single well-aimed shot at his target. No stray bullets struck property or individuals. Could someone have been hurt if the bullet ricocheted or fragmented?
Wait a minute, there's no shot that bullet didn't go through and hit the tent behind him. There's no shot. No shot, I don't believe that. There's no way. It had to have. It was a rifle. No way. Well, I mean, depending on the rifle, depending on the range, it could have got stuck in his spine. Maybe. Is that what they're gonna argue? I don't see how you'd argue that, though. You'd have to prove, obviously, the autopsy. Which they would have already have did. He's already buried. God, you'd have to make a really good defense to be like, oh, well, I mean, he only shot one bullet. What do you mean he only shot one? The fact he shot any is not okay. Like, I don't even know. Good luck with that, my dude.
Of course. But Robinson's lawyers will say you can't convict someone of aggravated murder because of what might have happened or because guns are inherently dangerous. He knew what he was doing, targeting Kirk only. And by targeting Kirk, he intended not to shoot anyone else. Prosecutors will say it doesn't matter that no one else was actually injured or that he was allegedly a good shot because Robinson knowingly created a great risk.
Yeah,
Once the bullet leaves the rifle, he is no longer in control of what that bullet does or who it strikes. The charging instrument lays out the groundwork for this. Quote,
True. So why you always make sure you're not shooting towards, like, if there's woods, you have to know what's behind those woods. Like, I couldn't shoot guns in my backyard because though there's woods there, it's about like 150, 170 yards of woods, and then it's like 200 yards of an open field, but then there's a road that cuts through that field that is commonly used, and bullet could easily go through every tree and every bush, even break through a few branches and hit a fucking car, hit somebody driving in their car. Like, that's why we can't shoot guns, like, in the neighborhood, in, like, the suburbs. That's a big part of the reason why. Even if you have wooded areas behind you, you might only have 100 yards, and bullets go a very long way. They'll go for hundreds of yards if you shoot it high enough. Like, depending on the gun, like, you can't just do that and just hope. Like, I'd have to watch the clip again. Was there like against a building? Maybe if it was against the how did it not go through? I need to see what gun and what autopsy or something. That's what I need to see.
Mr. Kirk's team members were very close.
I can't remember what they said, that if they said it in this video what the gun was. Because depending on the caliber would depend on whether or not it could get stuck. Because like a 22 hunting rifle could potentially, because that shoots 22, and those are like 9mm sized bullets. Like, they're tiny little dudes. But like, if he was shooting like an AR or something, or like a 7.62, no, not 7.62. What am I thinking of? Fuck, I mean, I can't think of it off the top of my head. There's another ammunition I'm trying to think of, and I'm blanking on it. Fuck, it's not 50 cal. What is it? Fuck. Oh, that's gonna bother me. But yeah, depending on the bullet, you just can't spray and pray and hope that it doesn't hit anything that you don't intend it to. Because even if you hit your target, there might be something behind it that you didn't intend to hit. This is why, like, it's a huge, like, attention for, like, and why cops specifically have to train to watch out for the backfire. You know, watch out for civilians crossing the line of fire or behind the line of fire from, like, behind the target. And that's something you just learn in general from shooting even recreationally. You have to keep that in mind. You know, if somebody's even standing, like, even if they're next to you, they shouldn't even be next to you. Because the bullet's gonna fly out of the chamber and hit them in the fucking eye. And it's gonna be a red hot fucking bullet casing. And it's gonna fuck their shit up. So, like, you want them behind you. Like, at all times. You can't just be spraying in a general direction of a whole crowd and just, yeah, you know, it's fine. I only shot once, you know. It's okay. It's not okay. Well, it doesn't matter.
Close to him on his left and right, as well as some behind his canopy and others at various close locations near him. The large crowd surrounded Mr. Kirk on three sides. Temporary metal fencing separated attendees from Mr. Kirk by only a matter of feet. Directly above and behind Mr. Kirk was the UVU Hall of Flags, an indoor walkway spanning several hundred feet with floor-to-ceiling glass windows, which overlooked the plaza where Mr. Kirk was seated. People were in the walkway at the time of the shooting. Prosecutors also allege that Robinson, quote, passed closely to several other individuals beside Mr. Kirk, including the questioner who was standing directly in front of Mr. Kirk. So is Robinson going to get the death penalty? I'd say it's more likely than Mangione. He is, after all, in Utah, not the Southern District of New York. His hopes probably lie more with the appellate courts overturning a sentence of death. So what happens next? In New York,
What I say, the difference is, Luigi really did a good job in picking that target and checking the line of fire. He was up close with a pistol, so it was easy for him to have, like, an isolated public incident. But, like, Robinson, he shot from a distance over the fucking crowd. Like, shoot far enough and don't zero your gun right, that bullet's gonna land somewhere in that crowd. You know? And that's what they learned in the freaking, the Trump's case, when he barely missed Trump and it flew back and hit the firefighter instead. That's a perfect example of it. You just can't, you can't predict all that shit, you know? It's just fucked.
Mangione's state case.
But I also agree, if anything, Robinson is way more likely to get the death penalty than Luigi ever was. Mainly because of the reckless endangerment of, like, the crowd, plus minors to the age of 14 being there. That's gonna, no, you're fucked. They're throwing the book at you.
Moves forward on intentional
100%.
murder and weapons charges, but keep an eye on Attorney General Bondi's push for the death penalty in federal court. Although the DOJ usually lets the state go first, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that DOJ will jump the line, and that means the New York case gets dismissed under New York's unique double jeopardy statute. In Utah, the Robinson case has much further to go. Prosecutors still have to prove that a single shot created the kind of great risk that makes the murder a capital crime. The defense will file many motions to avoid the death penalty. My best guess is that the court will allow him to be tried for aggravated murder, a Utah jury will convict him and sentence him to death, and then the issue will be tested through the appellate courts. Whatever you think of the victims and the perpetrators in these cases, let's be clear. Murder.
Even if he doesn't get the death penalty, he's probably going to get life. They will make the argument that he is not of sound mind in one way or another, that firing into or over a crowd of children to hit his target showed an immense amount of, like, inhuman emotion or lack of concern for those kids, or anybody else for that matter, other than his target. So, like, he's definitely fucked. He's like, all they have to do is say, you shot into a crowd of kids to kill this guy. That's all they have to say. And it's done. Said and done. If they charge him with death penalty, he's gonna get the death penalty, because for sure a jury isn't gonna look at that and say, this guy shot into a crowd of kids to kill one guy. And they're either gonna give him life or the death penalty, honestly.
Is not politics, and violence has no role in day-to-day life in our society. This is why our justice system exists, and why the rule of law must always be strengthened and protected.
And our justice system also exists to help the little guy when you've been injured. And if that's you, I know a good lawyer. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel, channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.
True. Thank you, Leo.
The Justice Department keeps getting its ass kicked in court, especially in Washington, D.C.
Always there to educate us on what we need to know. We appreciate you. I've learned a lot from watching LegalEagle. I love the military stuff they do now as well. Because I'm a huge military war history buff. So I'm like a bit of a nerd when it comes to that stuff. So them getting into the weeds of all that kind of stuff, I love that. Shout out to both of them. It does kind of suck though about the Charlie situation. I'm really curious about where that kid came from. Why he came from, you know, kind of a thing. We'll let him down that road. Same kind of with Luigi, but not as much, I don't think. I don't know why. But no. It's just another thing that keeps me up at night. Wonders of the world. Not sure how many more I want. Or how many wonders I want left. If there are any. Well, let's be honest, there's probably plenty. But the whole political violence aspect of it is just getting annoying at this point. Because a lot of people label these people as vigilantes, and it's just not much I can do about that. Hopefully one day we'll have a bit better of a reputation to the name, you know? Once this shit, you know, starts to quell down a bit. Which hopefully, you know, will be sooner than later. But it's probably gonna take a long time, and I have a lot of work still. So don't hold your breath too hard. You know, breathe deep, and you know, stay cool. You know, just be easy. You know. I mean, I guess I could react to Donald Trump technically signing the executive order, but I don't think I need to. I don't want to. The only person I saw upload was Fox, and I'm not giving them the fucking satisfaction of me watching their fucking content, especially after the Obama clips again. Every time I'm reminded about that, I'm like, oh yeah, these people are literal just demons. They do not care. They are like, you remember all the kids in high school and middle school that they told you would grow up eventually? You know what I mean? They all work at Fox News now. That's literally all Fox News is, are the kids who were the ones who should have grew up in high school and in college, but never did. Like, who was it? It was a Hegseth or whatever, who was like the Fox News anchor, but now he's like the defense for whatever it is. Oh god, the clip of him on St. Patrick's Day will never leave my mind. He will always be that guy. He's just fucking downing a big ass bottle of alcohol live. Or was it a cup or some shit? I don't remember. It was like a mug. It's either St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, it was St. Patrick's Day. I'm glad he had fun. Not even mad about it. Not even a little. Hate that he's helping destroy our country. obviously. Like Destiny said, it's just hard to... It kind of sucks because I do feel bad, but at the same time, I was raised with the, you know, we all make our beds in life. Sometimes you gotta lie in it. And unfortunately, sometimes that's just literally. You motherfuckers burnt that shit so hard. You fucking bad. Give me my bacon. Give it to me. I will have it.